Because Thomas Jefferson made a statement. Here's a man highly regarded in the United States. I mean, there are more statues of him than probably anybody. And he made a statement towards the end of his life. He says, "Indeed, I tremble for my country when I consider that God is just and that his justice cannot sleep forever." You see, it haunted him to his grave because Thomas Jefferson knew. He knew what would happen. Matter of fact, he predicted exactly what we're dealing with today, what happened between people of African descent and those of European descent. Predicted it. He was a bright man. How do you reconcile behaving in such a barbaric way? Well, let's see what he said. He said blacks smelled bad and were physically unattractive. Well, this was inconsistent with his behavior because, you know, he fathered slaves, Sally Hemings. So it didn't smell that bad, huh? Now here's a more important one. He said we required less sleep. Now that one's more interesting to me. Why would he need to? What dissonance was he feeling that he would need to believe that blacks required less sleep? Why? What did he do? You know, he owned slaves. So what do you think? How hard do you think he worked them? What was a work day for a slave? Sunrise to sunset. So when you start looking at the notion of requiring less sleep, that's an interesting thing because I have to believe if I work you that hard. And boy, I got humbled when I found out how hard folks worked in the sugar plantations. Ooh-wee, I got humbled by how hard folks in the Caribbean were worked. But what I decided to do is I looked at the Library of Congress. Most of my work over the 9 years that it took to write the book, 6 years of that was research. The other part of it had to do with doing interviews of elders and reading slave narratives, and there are thousands of them. This is just one taken from the Library of Congress. Sarah Gudger from North Carolina wrote, "Never known nothing but work, never knew rest, felt like my back was going to break. This the gospel truth." Then I looked at what happened in the sugar plantations, and this was amazing. One final set of grim numbers underlines the way slaves on sugar plantations like Codrington, was a plantation in Barbados, were systematically worked to an early death. When slavery ended in the United States, slaves imported over the centuries had grown to a population of nearly 4 million. When it ended in the British West Indies, total slave imports of well over 2 million left a surviving slave population of only about 670,000. More than twice as many slaves were shipped to the island of Jamaica alone than all 13 North American colonies combined. The Caribbean was a slaughterhouse. In fact, the reason why there was more importation of slaves to these plantations is because they died so frequently. They were treated so badly, ate so poorly, that females never reached their menstrual cycles. They never actually started their menstrual cycles, so they couldn't reproduce, you see. And so many of them died, they had to import more. That's how treacherous it was, you lazy black folks that you are. Isn't that ironic, though? What's so ironic is black people run from the shame of feeling like they're perceived as lazy. I mean, I live with that so much that when I would go to hotels, I would leave it cleaner. Because your mother, everybody's mother taught you, leave it cleaner than you found it. So black folks are so hypersensitive, I was cleaning up the hotel room because I wouldn't want anyone to think I'm dirty, right? Now, other people in the audience that are of color, how much harder did your parents tell you you had to work to get to even? How much harder? You had to work twice as hard. Now, how come I knew that about you? How come I knew that? Think about it. And yet at the same time, white people think we're lazy, you see? But we're so hypersensitive because of the shame, right? And then our ancestors will work to death. To death. Recently, they unearthed a slave cemetery. They unearthed actually a slave cemetery in New York City. It's on Wall Street, by the way, in the shadow of the bull. Unearthed the slave cemetery, and they still to this day they're struggling. They recently, you know, have done a lot in terms of commemoration. I went to it took me everything to get to it. They had it blocked off so you couldn't get to it, but because they didn't want to deal with it. You know, you can't just bulldoze a cemetery. So here in all these skyscrapers, in the middle of it is this little cemetery, and there are slaves in that cemetery. More important than that was what the bones told us, because you know now you know you got CSI. Hell, I can go in there and tell you what's going on now. You know, so with the CSI thing, now you know, they've discovered a little bit about the bones. And to me, the most phenomenal thing about the bones is what they told us about those people and how they live. Majority of the people in there were children, infants and children, high mortality, infant mortality rate. They even know what they died of. Died of malnutrition and starvation, because they could tell by the rotting of the teeth and the jawline. So even though they most likely grew food, they weren't allowed to eat it. And then they found something even more peculiar that speaks to this idea of why he believed we required less sleep. They would show a large frame man, and they would find an injury where the muscle actually detached itself from the bone as a result of exertion and not injury. Stay with me. It detaches itself from the bone as a result of exertion. That means you work so hard, the muscle detached itself from the bone. You don't see those kind of injuries in contemporary society because no one's going to work that hard. Unless, of course, you have a gun trained on you from sunrise to sunset. So we do have empirical evidence of how hard folks worked. Then he went on to say that we were dumb, cowardly, and incapable of feeling grief. Why would Thomas Jefferson need to believe that? Why would he need to believe we didn't feel grief? What was he doing, do you think, that produced cognitive dissonance? You were killing people. Not only were you killing people, beating them, you were selling them, yes? Selling mothers away from their children and husbands away from wives. And surely they don't feel it, because if they felt it, that would make them human like me. So I simply say, and you see, it's not even so much that he said it, but he was an important person. If Joe, nobody said it, but he said it. So what do you think the rest of the folks, uneducated laborers, believed? Well, they don't feel grief, you know. After all, Thomas Jefferson says they don't. So he becomes a critical person in making those statements. But you see, it was all to relieve and to settle the conscience.
A wolf may shed its furs, but it may never shed its behaviors, right? And that's true. You see, this old satirical Russian proverb reminds us that changing appearance does not always mean changing deeply rooted systems or beliefs, you know. Throughout history, societies have often celebrated ideals of liberty while continuing practices that denied freedom to others. This contradiction, of course, is central to understanding the history of slavery in the United States and the discussions that continue today about its long-term effects, you know. So, in this video, we are going to look at a speech that was made by Dr. Joy DeGray. You know, she's one of the Black American scholars whose voice have tried to bring an awareness to the systemic racism that is being practiced against the Black Americans, right? And without further ado, I want us to dive into this video, listen to Joy DeGray give her speech. It's not the first time we are featuring Joy DeGray. We featured her in some past videos, you know. This is just another video, and I find it interesting and educational for you as well. So without further ado, let's dive in.
What people don't understand is that how American chattel slavery differed from other forms of slavery that preceded it. So if you think about, you know, and this is the kind of pushback you get when you talk about slavery. Well, I wasn't there. I didn't do it.
Yeah.
And that was, look at how long ago that was, you know. And they cannot seem to connect the dots on that. But what made it unique from any other form of enslavement was the manner in which a person became enslaved, the length of servitude, the treatment of the enslaved, and how they were perceived
as human beings. Before the European slave trade began, most people who became enslaved became so as a result of war. Two societies went to war, winners enslaved the losers, so on and so forth. But Europeans systematically turned the capturing, shipping, and breeding of other human beings into a business that would become the backbone of an entire economy.
Yeah.
You see, that's different. And it was situated around a belief in our intrinsic dehumanization, our lack of humanness. We were not perceived as full humans. And therefore, because we were not full humans, we didn't have to be treated like humans. After slavery came the multitude of lynchings, all the way up through George Floyd, Breonna. You know, it goes all the way. When did the actual injury and assault stop? What is the symptomology of post-traumatic slave syndrome? Because the truth of the matter, it's not a diagnosis. It's not post-traumatic stress disorder, which is treated with medication and talk therapy and any number of other things. Post-traumatic suggests that not only have you been harmed physically, you've been harmed emotionally, you've been harmed spiritually, you've been harmed economically,
Right.
you have been harmed politically, you've been harmed, and that requires more than medicine and talk therapy. That requires justice. Healing cannot happen without justice, because we'd love that to be it, because all they do is put a code in the DSM and figure out how to get paid.
Appreciate went on for a long time. Can you go back? Back one more. No white could ever rape a slave woman. The regulations of law as to the white race on the subject of sexual intercourse do not and cannot, for obvious reasons, apply to slaves. Their intercourse is promiscuous. We've now justified raping black women because they can't be raped. We aren't raping them. They're promiscuous by nature. So we can't do it. Forward, one more. The fact that white men could profit from raping their female slaves does not mean that their motive was economic. The rape of slave women by their masters was primarily a weapon of terror that reinforced whites' domination over their human property. Rape was an act of physical violence designed to stifle black women's will to resist and to remind them of their servile status. These become important instruments that you look at. And I want to give you some statistics as it relates to American history. By the mid-1800s, there was over 600,000 mixed-race children born. 600,000. How many of you know what miscegenation is? Miscegenation is an illegal marriage between people of different races. Actually, it was very profound here. That it was illegal to marry someone of another race. So when you consider the fact that one of the greatest issues and one of the number one reasons why black men were lynched, beaten, and imprisoned had to do with the fear that they were going to rape whom? White women. Now the numbers, I mean, we're talking about pure numbers alone. It was who being raped? Okay, it was black women being raped, but they can be raped. Let's advance forward. Before we get into the Casual Killing Act, the Casual Killing Act was written because of the number of people who were killed while being corrected. Okay. And if any slave resists his master, owner, or other person by his or her order, correcting such slave and shall happen to be killed in such correction, it shall not be counted felony, but the master, owner, and every other person so giving correction shall be acquitted of all punishment and accusation for the same, as if such accident had never happened. So that means that if you happen to be correcting someone and you beat them to death, you know how hard it is to beat someone to death? I mean, I thought about that. I said it happens so frequently that they created a law so that you wouldn't feel any what? No guilt, because you were simply correcting them. It wasn't your fault. So I went back to look at who was beating folks to death. I wanted to know. And it was white women. White women were beating black children to death. That's who was being beaten to death. But it wasn't her fault. She was just correcting them. You see, what we do is we rob ourselves of our own humanity when we refuse to look at this stuff. We rob ourselves of our humanity. And that's what people didn't know happened. Going forward, one more. Then you had the mental health folks. This is how we got in. We got in to try to fix it. In the early years of the 19th century, a physician named Samuel A. Cartwright argued that two particular forms of mental illness caused by nerve disorders were prevalent among slaves. One was drapetomania, which was diagnosable by a single symptom: the uncontrollable urge to escape from slavery. So now what we've done is we've now pathologized your desire to be free. Must be something wrong with them. Keep trying to free themselves. And again, it would be funny if it weren't in journals. You see, all of this is to remove the cognitive dissonance. Now we have, look at all the people joining in. You got Linnaeus, you got anthropology, you got physicians. All of them saying, they deserve it. It's not us. We don't need to adjust anything. And if they just tried harder, how about you people just pull yourselves up from your bootstraps? What's the matter with you? The playing field has been leveled. Well, we're going to see if, in fact, it's been leveled. Or is that conjecture? Move forward. Now, I want you to look at this photo very closely, and I want you to see who's in it. More important than the man hanging, because you got to understand the lynchings that occurred in America happened after slavery, not during. Thousands of lynchings happened after slavery, because this is a reaction to white fear of what we would do once freed. But we didn't create a vigilante group to take out white people, but they did create a vigilante group to take us out now that we're free. See, that happened after slavery. They were called the what? The Ku Klux Klan. They don't wear hoods anymore. They wear suits. But they're alive and well all over the world, even here. So, look at who's in the picture. I want you to look at this little girl in particular. You can't see her closely, but she's actually grimacing, like smirking. Now, remember, let's go back to the puppy concept here. She would be loathed and torn up probably if this was a puppy, which means he's less than that, because she's not disturbed. This little girl is not disturbed by this, but she should be, shouldn't she? People always ask me, they go, Joy, what was the impact on white people? There it is, right there. Can't feel.
Post-traumatic slave syndrome is an explanatory theory that really looks at multi-generational trauma. One of the things that's difficult for people is their first response is, oh my God, that happened so long ago. We're talking about people being captured, shipped, sold, beaten, raped, experimented on. And then you have to ask the question, did the trauma continue? Yes. So 300 years of trauma, no help, freed. No help, more trauma. If it's a sustained trauma, then the impact of that is also sustained. When we look at multi-generational trauma, we're looking at people who are maybe victims of natural disasters and their families and their children and generations of folks who have experienced war. And we know that there are residual mental, emotional, traumatic impact. And what I did was I started to look at the African-American experience, starting with slavery, as a real clear, long enduring trauma. I started to see that there were clear connections between that survival behavior and contemporary living in African American experience. I started to see common behaviors that I took for granted as, well, cultural. There's adaptive behaviors, survival behaviors. Well, what are they? Let's just say He's stupid, he's shiftless, he can't work, because I don't want you to sell him. So I denigrate them to protect them. That is called appropriate adaptation when living in a hostile environment. The little white boy, say Timmy, he feels really comfortable and happy about what his mom just said about him. And Trey looks at his mom and wonders, why can't you be proud of me? Because he doesn't understand the secret yet. And by the time he learns the secret, he will have already been injured by it. Post-traumatic slave syndrome.
So, without further ado, let's dive into this video and have a critical analysis. Joy DeGruy, most popular works is her studies on what she calls the PTSS, that is post-traumatic slavery syndrome. Just like we have post-traumatic stress disorder, she discusses Black American suffers from PTSS. So Dr. Joy DeGruy is an American social worker and educator and author, best known for introducing the concept of post-traumatic slavery syndrome. In her lectures and in her book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, America's Legacy of Enduring Injury and Healing, Joy DeGruy argues that the trauma created by centuries of slavery has been followed by segregation and discrimination, and this did not simply disappear after emancipation, Instead, Joy DeGruy suggests that its effects can be transmitted across generations through family experiences, social conditions, and institutions, Furthermore, we can study that according to Dr. Joy DeGruy, slavery in the United States was not simply a labor system. It was a system that deliberately stripped millions of Africans and their descendants of their language, cultures, family structures, legal rights, and personal autonomy. Families were separated through slave trade. Education was often forbidden and violence was used to maintain control, Dr. Joy DeGruy goes ahead and argues that these experiences left deep psychological and social wounds that continued long after slavery formally ended. You see, in her theory, Joy DeGruy proposes that repeated exposure to severe trauma over generations. Remember, Black people were enslaved for over 400 years, And remember the other day in 2019, Black Americans were celebrating the Year of Return, where the Ghanaian government welcomed back the Black Americans. Such a wonderful and a cheerful and very, very positive, move, You see, combined with continued discrimination, this is just a lot of trauma. You see, remember, Black people went through stages, not really stages, but a series of bad, I would call traumatic experiences. We had the emancipation, which also contributed to patterns of mistrust. We had anxiety, we had internalized oppression, and also other social challenges in some communities, While many scholars have agreed that historical trauma can have lasting effects, post-traumatic slavery syndrome itself remains a subject of academic debate, and it is not recognized as a formal medical diagnosis. Even so, Dr. Joy DeGruy's work has been influential in discussion about the long-term consequences of slavery, inequality, and real and racial injustices, Remember, a part of this video, which played earlier, Dr. Joy DeGruy spoke about Thomas Jefferson, and his role in Black people's suffering, So there's a contradiction in American liberty. America is really not free as they advertise themselves, So one of the most debated figures in history of Black Americans is, of course, Thomas Jefferson, Jefferson was the principal author of the United States Declaration of Independence in 1776, you see, which famously states that all men are created equal and possesses certain inalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You know, Thomas Jefferson, he might be the one who coined this word, all men are created equal. But we can see America is like the animal farm, you see. The pigs, once they grew fat and they realized that the farmer was becoming a nuisance, they kicked him out, they rebelled, and later on, when the farmer was gone, the pigs said that all animals are equal in this farm. Of course, they are all equal, but some animals are more equal than others. You understand? So in America, all animals are equal, but others are more equal than another. So more and equal cannot exist in the same sentences unless you are trying to arrive at a certain, you know, I would call it a stylistic device of interpretation in language, right? Now, Jefferson criticized aspects of slavery in some of his writings, and he also supported ending the international slave trade. However, he did not advocate for the immediate abolition of slavery during his lifetime. You know, Jefferson continued to benefit economically from the enslaved labor. Historians continue to debate the extent to which his financial dependence, political calculations, and racial views shaped his decisions. This contradiction illustrates a broader paradox within the early United States. The nation declared itself a champion of freedom, while millions of people remained enslaved. For many historians, this tension reveals that the country's founding ideals were applied unevenly, with freedom extended to some while denied to others. The economics of human slavery was thus affected, you know. The transatlantic slave trade and plantation slavery became one of the largest commercial enterprises in history. Enslaved people were treated as property that could be bought, sold, you know, mortgaged, inherited, and used as collaterals for loans. That's very serious. The forced labor of enslaved Africans contributed significantly to the production of crops such as cotton, tobacco, rice, and sugar. You know, these commodities generated enormous wealth for plantations, for plantation owners. We had the merchants, we had banks, insurers, and manufacturers in both the United States and Europe. It's always called triangular trade for a reason. You know, it was Africa, America, and Europe. And when you connect the two on a straight line, you form a triangle, right? So the business of slavery extended far beyond the plantations. Shipping companies, of course, transported enslaved Africans across the Atlantic. Banks financed slave purchases. Insurance companies insured slave ships, and in some cases, they even insured enslaved people as property. Textile factories relied heavily on cotton produced by enslaved people. Many sectors of the economy became interconnected with slavery. This was a demonstration how widespread its financial impact was. Slavery was deeply devastating to black people, you see. And for those who profited, slavery was often viewed primarily as an economic institution. For those who were enslaved, however, it meant the denial of freedom, family separation, we had violence, exploitation, and the constant threat of sale. Human beings were reduced to economic assets whose labor generated wealth for others while they themselves received no compensation for their work. You understand? So let's look at the continuing legacy of slavery as per the works of Dr. Joy de Grey. Although slavery in the United States of America ended in 1865 with the adoption of the 13th Amendment, its legacy continued through Reconstruction. segregation under Jim Crow laws, discriminatory housing policies, which is popularly known as redlining. We had unequal educational opportunities, and we also had disparities in wealth and political participation. Joy de Grey argues that understanding these historical experiences is essential to understanding many present-day social inequalities. Whether or not one fully accepts the works of Joy de Grey studies on PTSS, you know, the framework of post-traumatic slavery syndrome, we have, however, to understand that there is a broad scholarly agreement that slavery and subsequent discrimination have lasting economic, political, and social consequences that continue to shape American societies. Many historians, therefore, emphasize that examining the history does not diminish the nation's achievements. Rather, it provides a fuller understanding of how the ideals of democracy and liberty have often existed alongside exclusion and inequality. Recognizing these contradictions allows societies to better understand both their accomplishments and their failures. Joy de Grey's speech encourages audiences to consider slavery not only as a historical event, but also as a source of enduring social and psychological consequences. The works of Joy de Grey highlight the importance of acknowledging historical trauma while promoting healing, education, and community resilience. The life of Thomas Jefferson symbolizes one of the central contradictions in American history. A leader who articulated universal principles of liberty while also simultaneously, which means at the same time, he was participating in the institution of slavery. You know, you're fighting for democracy and freedom while you're enslaving other people. That's ironical, you know. So this contradiction continues to shape discussions about America, its foundings, and its ongoing pursuit of equality. The history, therefore, of black slavery was not simply a story of enforced labor. It was a vast economic system built upon the denial of human rights. Its consequences extended beyond the lives of those directly enslaved, influencing generations that followed. You see, understanding this history through careful scholarship and multiple perspectives therefore provides an opportunity to reflect on the relationship between historical injustice, national ideals, and the continuing pursuit of a more equitable society. Yes. So I hope that you've gotten enlightened. If you are enlightened, kindly share your thoughts in the comment section. Let's hear what you think about Joy de Grey's work on discussing Thomas Edison's shortcomings and her major work, which is a study on the post-traumatic slavery syndrome. Yes. Share your thoughts down below. See you in the next one, and stay positive.